Well, this morning we are continuing on in our series in Genesis that we actually started 2 years ago, back in 18 when I preached through 1 and 3, and then last year 4 through 11, and this year will be 12 and following. And really, the idea behind Genesis is that beginnings really, really do matter, and that's why we look at them. I think that at some level, Genesis is a very long prelude to the book of Exodus, which is there's these people called Israelites with this promise down in this land called Egypt. How did they all get there? And really, so if you look at the whole of Genesis, Genesis starts with God, then there was nothing else but God, and really ends with all of these people called the Israelites with this promise of this land that find themselves in slavery in this place called Egypt. And really what we've been looking at now is the story of Abram. And if you understand the story of Abram, so much more of the Bible will make sense to you. And largely because Abram is such a key figure. We're thinking about the Old Testament. You're thinking about Abram, or Abraham as he's later on known, but Abram, Moses, David. These are the heavy hitters, the heroes of the faith. These people. And so we've been looking at Abram. And what we saw last week as we're introduced to his story is that God made 4 promises to him. He said, I'm going to show you the land, and then he shows him the land, but then promises he's going to give them the land. The land's going to be given to his descendants, that God would make his name known. God would make Abram's name known, that everybody would know his name. And interestingly enough, thousands of years later, thousands of miles away, although it's like some of you guys are watching are closer to that time and that place than we are, but thousands of miles away here is actually we're speaking of Abram and Abraham. And so something tells me, like we even see the fact we're even talking about it, that the promise of God has come true because we're talking about Abram. So he says, I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to make your name known. I'm going to bless you. This is what he tells Abram. I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to curse those who curse you. And then I'm also, the 4th promise is, I'm going to bless all of the families of the world through you. Now, this comes in lots of ways. One of the ways in which it comes is that, as I made mention of it last week, is that for the most part, all of monotheistic religions, so religions that have that worship one God, they find their roots in Abram. Father Abraham. We would say Islam, Christianity, Judaism, which makes up about today a little over half of the world's population, would look to Abraham as one of the fathers of their faith. And Christians, obviously, we do this as well. And so it's really very interesting. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, you can't just write this stuff up and then will it into existence. So this is something that had been recorded years and years and years ago, and yet here we are, even if Moses wrote this about 1,500 years ago, here we are 3,500 years after that being recorded, and what we hear and what we see is we see a world that is being blessed even through Abraham. And so we see these promises. What we saw last week is that God is the promise maker, and he's the promise keeper, right? And that Abram's job is to live in the shadows of those two truths. That God both makes the promises and he keeps the promises. And I think a lot of times what we do is we think that, yeah, sure, God's made promises, but it's our job to keep them. It's our job to keep them. Or it's our job to make sure that they come to fruition. That responsibility is on my plate. And you go, well, no, it's actually not. God is both the promise maker and the promise keeper. And his promises coming to fruition is more about his will than it is your faithfulness. In fact, even we're going to see this morning is there's going to be a story of unfaithfulness, and we're still going to see the promises of God come true. The promises of God are based more in his will, and them coming to fruition is based more in his will than it is even in your faithfulness. We defined faith last week as this idea, is the act of belief and trust in the promises of God. In other words, God has made promises, and I'm going to live my life as if those promises are going to come true. Now, I told you that as we descend upon the story of Abram for the fall, there's going to be lots of moments, and there's going to be moments that are either going to, most likely just either going to go, I could never do that, or I would never do that. I could never do that. It's going to be these moments of faith where and that was last week's story. I could never do that. Last week, God said, I want you to go, and I want you to leave everything you know for something I'm going to show you. And you think to yourself, could I do that? I don't know if I could do that. I could never do that. Leave everything that I know, leave my house, leave everything that I know for something that God's going to show me. I don't know if I could do that. I could never do that. And this morning, we're going to get a story that you probably will read it and go, I would never do that. And it's interesting how these two stories are right back to back. Right? We'd expect this moment of great faith by Abram, where God made a promise and Abram acted upon it and he worshiped, and then that's directly followed by even a more faithful moment. But actually, what we're going to find this morning is a story where we would reflect and go, I would never do that. Now, there's a great danger in jumping into these stories in the Bible where we would title them, I would never do that. And so this morning, as we jump into one of those stories, we do so thankfully, right? We do so honestly, and we do so humbly. We do so thankfully in this idea that we can jump into one of these stories and go, we can actually learn from the mistakes of Abram. We can actually read the mistakes of a story and go, oh, okay. So don't do that. No, don't do that. So we do that thankfully that we can actually read that. We do that thankfully that my sins and your sins aren't recorded in God's canonized word for all of human history to read, right? We read one of these moments about Abram and we go, I could never do that. I would never do that. And yet here it is that we do so thankfully, knowing also thankfully that our greatest sins aren't necessarily recorded in canonized history. So we do it thankfully, right? We do it honestly. There's no need this morning or in the stories that will follow, there's no need for us, because Abram's such a hero of the faith, there's no need for us to sugarcoat or to make it look better than it really was because he's a hero of the faith. We can do so honestly. It's actually one of the things I love about the Bible. One of the things is that even its greatest heroes, save Jesus, its greatest heroes always have these moments of extreme failure. And the Bible records those faithfully as well as it does these great moments of victory. And so we do this very honestly. We get to look at this and we don't have to sugarcoat it. We don't have to polish it up so Abram looks better than he really does. So we do it thankfully, we do it honestly, and we do so humbly. There's a great danger when we look at these stories of the biblical heroes and we think to ourselves, I would never do that. As if given the same culture and the same context that we would make different decisions. And I just don't know that we would. I mean, there's this thing of you read about Adam and Eve and you go, Adam and Eve, why? Why would you eat from the fruit? As if given the same culture and the same context, we would have made a different decision. That we at that tree would have been like, oh, no, God, I've listened to you. I've listened to your word. I mean, Adam and Eve, of course, they're going to mess the whole thing up. But I would not. You go, no, you would have too. You would have too. I would have. And when we think that, I just don't think that's from humility that we think that. I think that's from pride. When we read the story of Abram, we read the story of these great heroes of the faith, and we think to ourselves, oh, not me. You go, right. I thought maybe this week, what if your sins were canonized in Scripture and Abram got to read them? And Abram read your deep, dark sins, and Abram thought to himself, I would never do that. Truth be told, he would probably be right. When we read of Abram and think, I would never do that, we're just probably not. And so we do this. We jump into these places. We do so thankfully, honestly, and humbly. So with that being said, let's jump into Genesis chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 10. Now there was famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And so we see Abram, he's moving from actually north down, then through what we know today as Israel, and then down to Egypt. If you're looking at Israel, to the right of Israel is a massive desert. But Israel kind of hugs the coastline. It's sometimes called like a fertile crescent. This idea that there's land, so you travel this way. But as the famine kicks in, they actually go down to Egypt. And what's interesting is that you're going to see a lot of parallels this morning, right, of this morning's story with what's going to happen later on, which is the larger story of Israel, which is they are driven to Egypt for a famine. They're there for a little while. Some plagues happen, and then there's a deliverance. But what we see here is that there's this desperation of a famine. There's great, like historic things, and even today, migrations that happen because of famines. Even today, people are, as we speak, people are leaving their lands because famines have taken hold of the land. And so this whole idea about this migration due to a famine is not new to us, nor is it non-existent. It actually still happens today. And this is a desperation that is driven by scarcity. And I don't know what this would be like. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could do without. There's a lot of things that could be scarce that you could do without. I don't know what it would be like to have the desperation of not knowing if and when my next meal would come. That's a famine. I don't know if I'll ever eat again. I don't know if food will ever pass my lips again. And I don't know that desperation. And hear me on this, is that Abram, is kind of over a clan, he's got kind of a clan, a people already. Now he doesn't have any descendants, but he's got people that are traveling with him. And it's one thing for me to starve, right? It's another for the people that I feel responsible for to starve. It's a one thing for my own stomach to have hunger pains. It would be another thing for other people looking to me with desperation and hunger in their eyes, thinking that I would be the one to solve their problems. And so this is a desperation that's driven by scarcity. There's a certain desperation that is driven by scarcity that we may or may not know. I thought about this. About a year ago, nobody, either here or online, nobody was really all that aware of how much toilet paper they had in their house. Am I right? Like, I don't know, I got some, or we're out of toilet paper. We're out. No, there's still one more roll, I think, somewhere. And then you'll go steal it from the other bathroom. Like, you didn't really know until like the middle of March hit. And then we had this like scampering about to hoard and to get all of the toilet paper we could. Why? There is all of a sudden this desperation that was driven by scarcity. And it set in. And people were freaked out. We've got like 4 rolls. What are we going to do? We only have 4 rolls left. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I go, that's toilet paper. We lost our minds over toilet paper. I thought, what if there was actually a real like scarcity of something? And by the way, I know you may not think this, but you can actually do life and live without toilet paper. And some of you guys maybe have come to that realization in the last 6 months, like we had to do that. But you could actually live. It would not be pleasurable. It would not be desirable, but it's actually doable. A scarcity in food is something very different. And so this is really interesting. I want you to think about Abram for a second. God says, here's the promise, Abram. I'm going to show you this land. And in this land, and he said, I'm going to give you this land, and I'm going to bless you. And Abram's got to be like, this is awesome. I got a land. I got the blessings of God. What more could I need? And then as soon as he gets that land, or when he didn't get that land, but he's living in that land, is that a famine hits. And so this land that is to be a blessing can no longer give him the provisions that he needs. And so he goes down to Egypt, where there would be hopefully promises of food. Then it goes on in verse 11. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake." I would never do that. Guys, have you ever had like a crazy idea that you're thinking to yourself, I think this is a little crazy, but I have to frame it in such a way that it seems reasonable and logical. Like, I know it seems a bit unreasonable and a bit illogical, but I have to frame it, maybe to your wife or to your spouse. I have to frame it in such a way that it seems very reasonable and logical. I go, how did this conversation go? Sarah, have I told you how beautiful you are lately? I mean, you are smoking hot. In fact, actually, I'll tell you right now, Sarah, you're more beautiful now than the day I met you. Oh, thanks, Abram. Thank you. And I just thought about as we're going down to Egypt, that everybody, they're going to see it. They're going to know. It's not going to, in fact, in other words, Sarah, it's not just me who thinks this. Like, everybody's going to think this because you're so beautiful. Thank you, Abram. In fact, Sarah, your beauty is going to captivate the country. Wow. So I was thinking, how about we just say that you're my sister, which actually, by the way, is technically, as we'll find out, technically it's true, right? They're not sure, but it's the daughter of his father, but possibly adopted, but not of his mother, as we find out later. So it's technically true. We say, but don't say that you're my wife, because if you say that you're my wife, they're going to kill me so that they can have you. So did you hear what he said then? He goes, so just say that you're my sister. Say that you're my sister so that, what? It would go well for me. And I go, oh, Abram, your decision, your plan is based in self-preservation. Whenever your plans are based in self-preservation, there's a good chance you're going to be exploiting other people. Whenever your plans are based out of self-preservation, I got to take care of me. I got to look out for me. What's going to happen is you're going to exploit other people. And in the exploitation of other people, this is what you'll find, is you'll find that your plan costs other people more and it benefits you the most. And this is how the manipulation, the exploitation works, is that your plan, your actions, whatever you are doing or planning to do out of the base of self-motivation, it will benefit you the most and cost you the least. And this is true. You think about your own life, you think about the lives of the people around you as they make decisions based only in self-preservation. Got to take care of me. Got to look out for me. I need you to do this. It's going to cost you more. Sarai, it's going to cost you more. Pharaoh, it's going to cost you more. It's going to cost, actually, in this story, it's going to cost Abraham the least. And this is what self-preservation does. And so he makes this decision based in self-preservation. It's our culture that says, you do you. That's self-preservation. You do you, I do me. And as long as you doing you and me doing me, as long as that works, then we can have a relationship. We can be friends. We can be in a dating relationship. We can even be married. But as soon as it costs me something, as soon as you get more benefit than I get, or I don't get benefit out of this, is then it fractures the relationship. The relationship is over. So this whole you do you, you do you, I do me. You preserve yourself, I'll preserve myself. But it's interesting, you think about something like self-preservation. It's so basic, right? We'd say that self-preservation at its foundation finds itself where? In the animal kingdom. Self-preservation is what animals do. You know, rarely do animals think to themselves, you know what? I should sacrifice myself for the good of another. No, that's not how animals think. When the hunter comes, they just go, I'm getting out of here faster than you. Right? The slowest antelope's the dead one. And so it's interesting is that self-preservation, it is inside of us. But self-preservation is largely a part of the animal kingdom. And I just think that humanity is one of the beliefs of Christianity is that humanity is different. Where we go, self-preservation is part of the animal kingdom, but humanity has to be different. We can't just be self-preservation. In fact, actually, not only did I think that, but this is actually how Jesus lived, right? You think about Jesus. Was the lens in which he looked at the world, is the lens in which he saw the world through, was it one of self-preservation? That it's going to cost you more than it's going to cost me? And I'll benefit more than you benefit? No, it's actually the opposite. Like the actions and life of Jesus, it cost him the most. It cost Jesus more than it cost me. And here's the crazy thing. I benefited from it more than Jesus did. I mean, we tell this story like God's the one who's super benefiting by us being in heaven. Like, God was so lonely. He was so sad that he needed you up in heaven. I'm like, that's not true. I mean, it may be true in some religions. I guess it's not Christianity. We don't get a sad God who's just longing for us to show up so the party can start. And so really in this whole thing is that it actually cost Jesus more than it cost us, and then we benefited more than he benefited. It's not even about self-preservation in Jesus, it's about self-denial. There's this time when Jesus starts talking about his need to go up to Jerusalem to die. And so he's telling his disciples, I got to go to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem I'm going to die. And then Peter, this one story where Peter, he pulls Jesus aside, and you know what it says? It says that he rebukes him. The Apostle Peter rebukes the Son of God. You go, how'd that go? Not well at all. And basically what he tells Jesus, he goes, Jesus, you need to stop this. I'm going to go to Jerusalem and die talk. That's not the words that need to come out of the Son of Man's mouth. And do you know what he says to Peter? Get behind me, Satan. Whoa. Jesus, you can't be going up to Jerusalem, putting yourself in harm's way. You can't go up to Jerusalem, talk about dying when you are the Son of God. Jesus, you got to talk differently, man. Get behind me, Satan. And then Jesus then talks about, it was in that context that Jesus actually talks about what it is to live. So if you've got your Bibles, flip with me quickly over to Matthew, then chapter 16, where this story takes place, verse 24. So he just said, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but the things of man. And Jesus just said that to Peter. Then he goes to all of the disciples, and he says to all of the disciples, then Jesus told his disciples, verse 24, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Check this. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul. Jesus says there's a way to live, to live, in which you're just trying to preserve your life, but you're at risk of losing your soul. And those of you guys who have made these and are making these self-preservation decisions, you know that. Sure, I had to bend my character. Sure, I had to lose a little bit of integrity. But if I didn't do that, do you know what would have happened to me? Oh, so you saved yourself, but it's doing something to your soul. And I love Jesus when he speaks in hyperbole. He goes, so what? So what? So what if you gain the whole world, but you lose your soul? Like, that's no life. In other words, there's a way to live that's all about self-preservation, but your soul will erode. And I this is going to shock you. I agree with Jesus and say, that's no way to live. And yet, a lot of the things that we do are through this lens. It justifies all sorts of things. I had to take care of myself. I had to do something. Do you know what would have happened to me if I didn't do X, Y, and Z? You save yourself, but it's quite possible that you're losing your soul. So really, and we see this with Abram, right? Abram makes this decision, this plan for self-preservation so that it will go well with me. And the other thing that he does is he actually makes this plan is based more in the depravity of man than it is in the promises of God. So this decision's about self-preservation, and then I'm going to make my decision based more in the depravity of man, how evil and corrupt man is, than it is in the promises of God. Because that's what he says. He goes, do you know what the Egyptians are capable of? Do you know what they're going to do if we show up and we say that we're married? Do you know what they're going to do? Do you know what they will do? Self-preservation, and now I'm going to make decisions based more in the depravity of man than I will in the promises of God. Do you know how bad people are? And we see this. I think an appropriate response maybe would have been like this conversation between Abram and Sarai would be like, so Abram, what do you think will happen down there? I don't know. You're pretty good looking. I'm a little afraid of what may happen. But I'll tell you what I do know, Sarai, that God's promised me. He's promised to bless those who bless me. He's promised to curse those who curse me. He's promised me a line, children, descendants. And so what we're going to do is, I'm not sure what's going to happen down there, and we'll be wise. We'll make wise decisions. But at the same time, we're not going to let our fear of the depravity of man drive us from trusting in the promises of God. Now, it'd be interesting because we'd want to jump on Abraham here, right? We go, oh, Abraham, how could you do that? But we do the exact same thing. You know, you've done it, I've done it, so you lied. Well, okay. So, yeah, okay. Well, yes, that was a lie. However, the only reason why I lied is because I knew exactly what they were going to do before they even did it. Okay. Yeah, I knew exactly what they would say. I knew exactly how they were going to respond. I knew exactly what they were going to do before they did and said anything. And so I acted appropriately to something that they have not yet done. Oh. Self-preservation. You're trusting more in the depravity of man than in the promises of God. See, we can't jump on Abram for this because we do the exact same thing. And so we see Abram do both of these. Remember what I said last week and even this morning is that God is the promise maker and the promise keeper, and Abram's job is to live in the shadows of those two truths. And what we see is Abram move from the shadow of those two truths to live in the shadow of two other things, which is self-preservation and the depravity of man. And interestingly enough, he's actually looking to Sarai to illegitimately provide for him what only God could provide legitimately. What is he saying? Sarah, if we do this, like, it will go well for me. There will be provision and protection. And so, Sarah, we need to do this because it will give me provision and protection. Well, who promised him provision and protection? God did. And so now he's actually asking Sarai to illegitimately provide that which only God could provide legitimately. I would never do that. I know. Genesis chapter 12, going on in verse 14. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram and had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, camels. And so part of this, we say not only is Abram spared, but he gets all sorts of blessings. And so if you're Abram, you're thinking to yourself, work like a charm. This is exactly how I thought it would go. They thought she was beautiful. I knew they were going to kill me, but they didn't kill me. Instead of being killed, I got look at all the things that I got. It's actually interesting here how Sarai then is referred to not as Sarai, not as his wife, but the woman. In other words, there's been now a break in that relationship. Abram, you have not treated her like Sarai, and you have not treated her like your wife. It says that then Pharaoh took her into his home, and all of the implications that would go with that. That they were married, and all of the implications that would go with that. And I know for a lot of you, especially guys that are listening to this, you would rather die than to have your wife be with another man. And Abram thinks differently. He would rather have his wife be with another man into another house, and for him to be spared. Goes on then in verse 17. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. Some of the sweetest words you'll ever read in the Bible. Some of the sweetest words that'll ever be spoken of your own life. But the Lord. Abram had his plan. Pharaoh had his plan. But the Lord. Abraham knew what he was going to do, how it was going to play out. Pharaoh knew what he wanted and how it was going to play out. They could all project the future. They knew the trajectory of how this story was going, how this narrative was unfolding. But the Lord. The same is true with you. You had your plans. You knew how things were going to go. You knew how things were going to respond. But the Lord. And what we see here is that God interacts and interjects himself into the story. It says that he afflicted Pharaoh with plagues. And we don't know what those are. We think about Egyptians and plagues. We think about Exodus, right? But actually this is before Exodus. We think about Pharaoh and plagues and people leaving the land under said plagues. We go, that's the Exodus story. It is, but we see it actually here first. We don't know what the plagues are. We don't know how Pharaoh found out. was that, God could have come to him in a dream. Somebody else could have told him. Sarai could have said, you know what? Odds are, this is weird, I know. He could have put it together. As soon as I brought you into my house, everything started going crazy. However it is, the truth came out. And I love this, that God orchestrates the story so that the truth comes out. There are sins of disobedience, there's sins of negligence, and there's sins of ignorance. In other words, disobedience, I know what God wants me to do, I'm just not going to do it. That's disobedience. There's things of negligence. It's like, I didn't mean to sin, but this is kind of what happened. That wasn't my goal, but that's what happened. And then there's sins of ignorance. I didn't know that I was sinning. And it's interesting here that God holds all three in account. Because Pharaoh could have said, I didn't know. And as soon as he finds out what's happened, he goes to then rectify the story. And then he confronts Abram. He goes, Abram, why would you do this? Why would you say she's my sister if she's your wife? Why did you let me take your wife? What are you doing? Now, she's your wife. Love and care for your wife. Take her and get out of here. And this is the sad place in the Bible, and we see these in other places, where Pharaoh is more honest and has greater integrity than the great father Abram. The hero, one of the heroes of the faith. You go to Hebrews 11, it talks about Abram, about his faith. He's in the Hall of Fame of faith. And here we see Mr. Pharaoh is more honest and has greater integrity than Abram. And we see this in other places. The Abram of God against this pagan Pharaoh. And God sends him away. And interestingly enough, that God and Pharaoh cared more about Sarai than Abram did. Abram that's what self-preservation does. I just cared about myself. That's what making decisions in the light of human depravity over God's promises, that's where that will lead you. And we see that actually God and Pharaoh cared more about the marriage than Abram. And I go, that's another issue. The one who should be caring most about your marriage, caring most about your wife, should be Abram. But he's the last person in the story to be doing it. And the other thing is, we don't even see this place where Abram then apologizes. I mean, hopefully that happened. There was a restoration. That had to have been an awkward conversation. But we see them just going. And that's just kind of where it's left. And what we see is, we see these ripple effects of sin. It's interesting because people will tell me well, basically it's, I can do what I want to do. Doesn't affect anybody else. And I go, that's actually a false statement. I can do whatever I want to do. It doesn't affect anybody else. It's just me. I go, that's just not true. And actually if you think that's true, then you probably grossly underestimate your effect on other people. And if you think that's true, I can almost guarantee you that whatever you're doing is actually costing other people more than it's costing you possibly. Because there's this ripple effect of sin and unfaithfulness and disobedience. And we see this with Abram. Abram comes out from the shadows of God's promises, lives in the shadows of the depravity of man and self-preservation. And because of that, we see the ripple effects of sin. The ripple effects it would have certainly had on Sarai. The ripple effects it would have had on Pharaoh and his house. And not just his house, but quite possibly Egypt. All why? because Abram was afraid. He feared. And in his fearing, he trusted more in the things that he knew than the God that he trusted. But the Lord. And think what I love about this story is that, like, Abram does not act in a way in which God should intervene. Right? We think that if we're super faithful, if we follow God and we do this, then He will intervene in our story and bless us. But actually, like Abram acts in no way in which would conjure up God to intervene anything. And yet He does. Like, actually, I know from my own story and from the stories I know from talking to you guys is that God does this all the time. We're like, I was doing my own thing, Josh. I was doing my own thing. I wanted nothing to do with God, and then God intervened. Yeah. Then God smacked me up onside the head. I go, yeah. I wasn't thinking about going to church. I didn't want to read my Bible. I didn't want to pray. I didn't want none of that, Josh. And then God just comes in and he just whacks me. You go, yeah. Why would He do that? Well, He would do that because He's the promise maker and the promise keeper. And even in the midst of your rebellion, that does not change about Him. I think this is relevant for us today because, once again, our job is not to fulfill the promises of God. Our job is to live in reality of them, and the reality of them. And what I see a lot today, I've seen a lot in the last 6 months, and I would like to say that generally speaking, that Christianity has responded differently than the world. And I just don't think that we have corporately. I think as the world has descended into a desperation that is driven by scarcity, we have responded in very similar ways. Ones of self-preservation, and ones in which we are more terrified of the depravity of man. What will happen? Than we are living in the peace of the promises of God. So I go, this is us. As things have become scarce, as the desperation that's driven by scarcity has kind of the world that we are kind of living in, of what will it look like. And I hear out of the mouths of all sorts of Christians, self-preservation, 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 self-preservation. Do you know what you're doing is not right? Yes, but do you know if I don't do this, what will happen to me? What will happen to my family? Do you know what other people will do to me if I don't do this? I go, oh, so we lose integrity and we're not as honest as we should be because we have already anticipated and have known that humanity is depraved. My great fear right now is that we, corporately as a people, we are not living in the shadows that God is the promise keeper and the promise maker, but that we are living in the shadows of self-preservation and human depravity. And even as we look at our story, go, but where will our story go? I go, I don't know where it will go, but I do know this. But the Lord. May we as a people, individually or corporately, may we not project a future of just self-preservation and human depravity that is void of a promise-keeping God who interacts with human history. And if we do, we will find ourselves in the same place of desperation, of disparity, of lack of hope, of fear that Abram finds himself. May we walk into the future from today into a world increasingly in chaos, knowing that we follow a God who will not only make his promises, but keep his promises. And even if and when we prove to be unfaithful, will still insert himself into the story to bring about his predetermined end. That's the God that we follow. And that's why then even Jesus can say, I'm not about self-preservation. I'm about God's kingdom here and his will. I'm not about making my choices based out of human depravity, because Jesus knows that it's human depravity that will put him on the cross. And even in the moment in the garden where he's wrestling between this I don't want to do it, but I know it's what needs to be done. He's wrestling between this, but humans are depraved, but God, this is your will. As we see him trust God the Father, the promise keeper, the promise maker. I pray that we'd be the same.